For the naval vessels which were shown, a lot of them are either battle cruisers, battleships, or just general cruisers. There is a lot here which would definitely indicate another massive expansion into naval with the larger machines. Starting with Germany, which had a ton of different battleships during the Second World War, and also battle cruisers. The first one on the list is the Gneisenau, which was part of the Scharnhorst class of battleships. This machine had 9 280mm guns, 12 150s, 14 105s, and 16 37s, with also some torpedoes to go alongside it. The machine, being launched in 1936, served in World War II for the Germans, but unfortunately was sunk as a block ship in 1945 and then scrapped after the war. This machine would have access to a ton of armor, being a very decent World War II battleship, and would be able to do pretty well for the Germans, I think, especially with the size of guns that it has. The next one is the Nassau, and the Nassau was part of the Dreadnought battleship idea from the Germans. Basically, during the First World War, it was commissioned into service in 1909, and all of the class of the ship, since the Nassau is the name of the battleship and also the class, served until 1919. These machines had 12 280mm guns, 12 150mm guns, 16 88s, and 6 45cm torpedoes, with a belt of 300mm of armor alongside the 280mm which was sat on the turret. When it comes to the power of these things, 22,000 horsepower was designed to move this full-loaded 21,000-ton behemoth, and it would be very similar to the machines we already have in the game for the battleships, basically the First World War designs and ideas. The next one being the Scharnhorst, which of course is very similar to the Gneisenau, being part of the same class, and being a battleship or battle cruiser, depending on who you ask. It had the same armament as the Gneisenau, and was very similar to it, and also at the same time it was lost as well. Both of them, unfortunately, having a very sad time, with the Scharnhorst being sunk following a surface action on the 26th of December 1943, after being commissioned into service at the start of the Second World War on the 7th of January 1939. Then we have another machine, which is the Tirpitz, for the Germans in two forms, the 1944 variant and, of course, the earlier variant where it was around. The Tirpitz being one of those vehicles which has a very storied history for a larger ship, and being one of the Bismarck class battleships, the second one. Now, as built, this machine had 8 380mm guns on it, 12 150s, 16 105s, 16 37s, and also 12 20mm guns. The 1944 variant, which had the modifications on it, gave it a bit of extra AA support in the form of 58 20mm guns and also some torpedo tubes. 58 20mm guns. I mean, when you really want to survive from aircraft, and you realize that aircraft are your main foe, it makes sense. You know what happened to it though after the refit? That's right, it was sunk by the Royal Air Force bombers on the 12th of November 1944, meaning that the refit that it had didn't really matter anyway. What a shame. So this is another massive battleship for the Germans, would be around about 52,000 tons, and also powered by some beefy engines, giving this 12 Wagner water tube boilers and about 160,000 shp. Italy bucks the trend. Instead of having battleships and battle cruisers, instead they have the P420 Sparviero Art. This is very similar to the Sparviero that we have in the game for the Italians, but it does have a different weapon system. The one that we have in the game has access, of course, to the 76mm, which is the Autobreda, very powerful gun. This one is slightly different. It looks like on the front it has access to the Dardo weapon system, the CIWS one, the close-in weapon system, and has access to two rapid-firing 40mm made from Bofors. These guns are the 40mm L70s, and if you haven't seen them in game, they're already on a few vehicles. Ridiculous fire rate, and having two of them would be incredibly nice. So for Japan, we have 4 ships on offer, mainly with battleships, starting with the Fuso. Now, the Fuso was a First World War battleship. It was the lead ship of the Fuso-class dreadnought battleships, had access to 6 twin 356mm guns, 16 152s, and also some torpedo tubes, with a belt of around about 250 to 300mm, depending on where you look, and the same on the barbettes as well. This would be very similar to some of the other First World War machines that we have in the game, but obviously of Japanese descent. The unfortunate thing about this vehicle is it was actually used in the Second World War after being launched in 1914 and was lost at the Battle of Surigao Strait, so unfortunately didn't survive history. It did actually have a different armament in the Second World War though, compared to its First World War self, where it had access to the 6 twin 356s, 14 single 152s, 4 twin 127mm DP guns, 8 triple, 6 twin, and 23 single 25mm as well, showing the necessity for AA on these machines. The next one is the ISE, or the ISE, I-S-E, is basically what it is. This is another First World War machine, and it was part of a dreadnought battleship class as well. This being part of the ISE class battleship, it was about 30,000 long tons, had access to the same armament as the others, so 6 twin 356mm, 20 single 140s, and also 4 single 7.62mm machine guns as well, because why not? Oh, sorry, 76.2mm AA guns, not 7.62, 76.2. Then also torpedo tubes as well, had a belt of around 300, so very similar to what we've seen before, and also was sunk by an air attack on the 28th of July 1945, so at the end of World War II. Another machine which was used from the First World War to the Second World War by the Imperial Japanese Navy. It did have a different configuration between the different areas. Basically, it has 3 separate variants. So the first one, which we talked about, the second one, which added 10 twin 25mm guns and removed the 76.2mm and a few of the 140mm, and then the 1945 configuration, which had access to 4 twin 356s, 8 twin 127s, 31 triple, 11 single 25mm AA guns, and rocket launchers as well, because why not? Let's have a bit of fun. It also carried around about 22 to 24 aircraft with 2 catapults, so that could be something we see in the future. The next one is the Yamashiro, and the Yamashiro is another dreadnought battleship from the First World War for Japan, which also was sunk in 1944 at the Battle of the Surigao Strait. This was actually part of the Fuso class battleships as well. It was the second one that was available and had very similar armaments to the Fuso, with no real differences apart from it had 92 25mm AA guns on it, which didn't keep it alive. Then the next one is the Yubari. Now the Yubari is slightly different. It is a light cruiser which was built between 1920s or 1922 and 1923. It's basically a post-First World War cruiser pre-World War II cruiser with access to 6 140mm guns, one 80mm gun with two 7.7mm machine guns as well, also with some torpedo tubes on it as well. Then it was modernized in 1944, where it was given 4 140mm guns, one 120mm gun, and 15 Type 96 25mm AA guns with torpedoes and depth charges alongside. The armor on this cruiser is severely lacking though, in only 38mm for its belt and 25mm for its deck, so this would definitely be much more of a lighter cruiser compared to some that we have in the game. It could go a speed of 65.7 kilometers an hour though, with some pretty beefy engines. Britain also has some offerings when it comes to naval, starting off with the HMS Hood, which was the lead ship of her class of 4 battle cruisers, which were built for the Royal Navy during the First World War. The Hood is actually more known for another occasion, though, in the Second World War, where unfortunately the Bismarck blew it up. The Hood's aft magazine was hit by one of the Bismarck shells, and the whole ship just exploded, which was very much unfortunate in the Battle of the Denmark Strait. And the HMS Hood itself, being a battle cruiser, had access to 4 twin 15-inch guns, 12 single 5.5-inch guns, 4 single 4-inch AA guns with 6 21-inch torpedoes. And then in 1941, after many modernizations, it was sunk with 4 twin 15-inch guns, 7 twin 4-inch AA guns, 3 octuple 2-pounder AA guns, which is always lovely to see, 5 quadruple 0.5-inch MGs, and then 5 20-barrel unrotated projectile mounts, which are basically 7-inch anti-aircraft rockets, because why not? And then 2 twin 21-inch torpedo tubes as well. The armor ranged from 305 to 152 millimeters on the belt, but unfortunately that didn't save it from its fate. The HMS Renown is also another vehicle which has been spotted for the British. The Renown is another First World War machine. It is a battle cruiser and was used not just during the First World War, but also during the Second World War as well. It was a class of 2 battle cruisers which were built with an armament of 3 twin 15-inch guns, 5 triple, 2 single, 4-inch guns as well, 2 single 3-inch AA guns, and 2 21-inch torpedo tubes, with a general belt armor of around about 152 to 100 millimeters, with about approximately 100 millimeters everywhere else when it came to its general armament. Unfortunately, the Renown itself was broken up at Faslane in 1948. Obviously, it served its country well in the First World War and Second World War, and the Repulse, unfortunately, was sunk in an air attack near off Kuantan in 1941, so it didn't last too much of the war. The last one is the Fairmile D601, labeled Big Captain. Now, we have the 601 already in the game. It's actually a rank 3. It's MGB for the British, so this would probably be a special version, maybe with a specific captain on it, or maybe with something else. My guess is an event or a premium one, maybe even a battle pass vehicle, who knows. America has some big ships as well, starting off with the Alaska, which of course is part of the Alaska class, which were 6 very large cruisers which were ordered before World War II, but were basically created or in commission in late World War II and all the way into 1947. The idea was to counter the Deutschland-class pocket battleships, which were being built by the Germans at the time, but unfortunately those things were already pretty much countered. So generally, now when it comes to the Alaska, it was also, I believe, shown in the teaser trailer for big ships such as battleships when Update New Power was around, so it wouldn't be a surprise if this was also something that is definitely coming in the future. Armament-wise, it had 9 12-inch guns, 305mm in size, 12 5-inches, 56 40mm, and 34 20s. You don't want to get anywhere near this thing when it comes to its AA armament. The armor on it, though, only 230mm on the side at the highest, going to 130mm in other areas, and the barbettes were around about 330mm as well. The ship was only 34,000 long tons, but did have a good speed behind it, being able to go pretty quick at about 31 to 33 knots, and obviously survived the war because it didn't really take part in it too much. Definitely a big machine. The later variants of the Alaska class, the Philippines, the Puerto Rico, and the Samoa, were actually cancelled in 1943 when they weren't really required. The Alaska and Guam and Hawaii, though, were commissioned in 1944, or at least the Alaska and Guam was, but they were then decommissioned in 1947, only to be broken up in the 1960s, not really doing too much in their service history. Then we have the Arizona. This is a Pennsylvania-class super dreadnought battleship, so not just a normal dreadnought battleship, a super one. And what this means is it has access to 4 triple mountings of 14-inch guns, 22 single 5 inches, 4 single 3 inches, and 2 21-inch torpedo tubes, with around about 343 to 200mm of armor on the belt. I wonder what makes them super dreadnoughts. That seems pretty dreadnoughty to me. Anyway, the Arizona, the BB-39, was not just used in the First World War. It was decommissioned in 1941 and stricken from the record in 1942. And its status right now is actually as a memorial wreck, so you can still see it around about the place, which is lovely. Then we have the Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh is the CA-72. This was a Baltimore-class cruiser, so we already have the Baltimore in the game. This would be very similar to it in the form of the 9 8-inch guns, 12 5-inch guns, 48 Bofors, and 22 Oerlikons, which it would be able to use. It gained 2 battle staves while it was serving in the Second World War, and did survive the Second World War, being stricken in 1973 and sold for scrap in 1974. This machine was used in the later years of World War II, being commissioned in October of 1944. The next one is the Indianapolis. This machine was another cruiser. It was part of the Portland class, which we have in the game, the heavy cruiser variety, meaning that it would have access to 9 8-inch guns, alongside 8 5-inch anti-aircraft guns, 2 3-pounder 47s, and also a belt armor of about 127mm worth of armor. And this was obviously laid down in the early 30s, meaning that it was one of the older types of cruiser compared to something like the Pittsburgh, and therefore would not be as powerful, but still nice to see. The USSR also gets some ships, and these ones are probably the more interesting ones out of what we've seen here. And the major reason is because we have a bunch of them here which were never finished. Some of them were laid down, but were never actually fully completed, starting with the Kronstadt class battle cruiser. These are Soviet designs. This started as the Project 69 heavy cruiser, and there was 2 or 3 of them planned, but they were cancelled before they were fully built. Basically, they were laid down as their hull, and then they were not completed even in armament by 22nd of June 1941, almost 2 years after the start of the construction. And then, of course, you had Operation Barbarossa, and the whole thing was cancelled and moved on to other projects. This machine had 3 twin 380mm guns, 4 twin 152s, 4 twin 100s, and 6 twin 37s if it was built, which it wasn't, meaning that this machine was never finished. It would definitely have some interesting guns on it, but unfortunately never to see the light of day. The next one was the Stalingrad. Now, the Stalingrad was the successor to the Kronstadt. This was a set of vehicles which were designed in 1940s, but unfortunately they were planned to be built, but they were also cancelled, so never saw the light of day in their full configuration. These machines would have 305mm guns in the form of 9 of them, 6 twin-mounted 130s, 6 quadruple 45mm, and 10 quadruple 25mm as well, with 180mm worth of belt. So that would be that. There is also the Parizhskaya Kommuna battleship. This was part of the Gangad class battleships used by the Imperial Russian Navy in the First World War. It was built in 1909 to 1911. It was put in service in 1914 and served during the First World War. And then it was also used by the Soviet Union after the First World War, recommissioned in 1925 after being decommissioned in 1918, and eventually was sold for scrap in 1957 after being used in the Second World War by the USSR. This machine had access to 4 triple-mounted 12-inch guns, 6 single 4.7s, 1 single 3-inch, and also some torpedo tubes on top of that in the form of 4 17.7-inch machines. Then, after the 1941 refit, it had this same 4 12-inch guns, then 12 4.7-inch guns, 3 3-inch guns, 16 1.5-inch guns, and 12 0.50-inch guns as well, so increasing its AA armament by a lot. It also had access to the same armor, so 225 on the belt to 125, which would be quite nice. And then also it didn't have access to a ton of engine power to compensate for its size. Being around 25,000 tons, it was only able to go around about 24 knots or 44 kilometers an hour. That is all the naval stuff that is in the list. A ton of different things, all mainly large, massive machines, which will make sense to come to the game, since that is what we're doing in naval. Bigger and better. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank BRFC, Swollen Ostrich, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Lafouche, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.